If not a road less traveled, since many have gone along the byways and the paths struck by Heidegger and Nietzsche, but let's say our promise to keep um, is continuing here in trying to get to the Anfanglish, or the point which in Heidegger we see as set off against um, the traditional account in toto, in its completeness. Um, we have this sense uh, that because of the understanding of being as um, brought out in Heidegger, that there's a new order to um, this Eigenstadt, or first beginning, and that therefore whatever we see in the tradition, in the history, is subordinated to this point. But okay, so how do we construct this point? Nonetheless, it seems that we can only construct it through going through our history, Heidegger is telling us. Um, but let's look at some more sort of the slideshow of Nietzsche just for a moment to um, show the weight of this moment right before Heidegger. So again, if we look at some details, for instance, we're talking about colors and the difference between somebody who is colorblind and somebody who is for cones or other color conditions. But we could think of that even more radically when Nietzsche's speaking of this um, utterly confused situation of the X quality, which stands for, it could stand for essence as opposed to accident, as it were. All these words are fraught with confusions. Essence somehow is a Latin translation of ousia, but already ousia is a very complex term in Aristotle. Ousia being sometimes the word we translate as being, although it's not the only word translated as being out of either Plato or Aristotle, especially in this, the famous text of Sophist, Einai, or some word along those lines. Um, there's this, the questions that are raised in the Sophist are key there. Um, so the problem in Nietzsche with the vision uh, with regard to the X is compounded when we consider that this goes also for instance, solidity or feeling of solidity. Um, we see the image of the stone in whatever colors or whatnot, or for that matter, also if we're seeing it as a squirrel, it will look much different. Um, Perhaps we get an insight into that contraction, when on the occasion when one goes to a place where one hasn't been since one was or a small child, and then it all somehow it strangely seems smaller than it did. This is a kind of um, hay it's like a hay sized bit of uncanniness, I suppose. Um, but if you consider that none of the let's say thousand parts of the possibility of, or possibility or dunamos. I'm trying to put in the word dunamos a little bit here, the Aristotelian word to show. Um, Eventually, we want to get to Heidegger's metaphysics data interpretation. Um, to show the juxtaposition of the way these translations, interpretations, or so on are going. Bringing that from Nietzsche's point of view, um, all the time we're making metaphors by taking one of the thousand parts of the possibility of sight and then mixing it with some possibility of yea saying and nay saying, of whether that is brought out through an immediate emotional sense of whether the thing is acceptable or not acceptable, whether it's brought out through um, the thinker's grasp of something as this is what it is, and then therefore these and these inferences follow, and so on, whether it's brought out through an immediate intuitional sense that doom will soon follow the one that goes down this path, whether it's simply a matter of whether it brings out the right um, mood or social atmosphere. Um, any of those qualities could be mixed with any of the senses, and any of the senses could be brought out through this myriad of the perspectivalism. So I think the more one sees into that, the more one sees that Nietzsche himself is therefore casting himself in the position of knowledge which he's saying is this mendacious invention, which only showed up for a second, bringing us into, I'm thinking especially of the truth and lies in the extramoral sense, but he does this throughout all his entire work. Bringing those things together, the more you sense it, it's more like in Hitchcock, the moment where he shows you the metaphor of Cary Grant taking Grace Kelly to bed as the moment when finally you turn to the window and you see out the fireworks exploding in their utterly sharp colors. This is what he means when he's saying that everything happens in metaphors, because there was nothing necessary about the particular colors we see the world in, but neither the particular how big it is, how small it is, what shape it is from a certain, whether we're a worm seeing it, whether we're something else. And then that being mixed with a particular another state, which is just a state of another sense, such as how hard it is, how the solidity in various forms, whether it's painful or pleasurable, and then mixed with the other senses, it creates it's this uh, just the sink turning on in the water, suddenly splashing out as just a stream of metaphoric motions. Nothing can stand still there. So then he's saying you can't get to the X, quote unquote, there, the ultimate reality, or so on. Now, so all of this, I think, if you look at it from the Heideggerian point of view, we can contest this, and also even from the Straussian point of view in the way. So supposing of all these selections, there were one that were the best position. Maybe that's even the human being and not something, mutated beyond the human being. Say that we're even and this would go with regard to knowledge, which is to say, speaking to ourselves as we are now in the Suke. That's how Plato understood knowledge. That's how Plato understood reason. Now, Heidegger's, this is one of the chief points of Heidegger's, and one could say also Wittgenstein's renewed awareness of these situations, and deeper Anfang, as it were, here. No longer is thinking only thought as the movement of speaking to ourselves, or doing logos or logic in the suke, or in the mind in modern terms, but mind is a restrictive term. or it has less content than the suke did. Suke would include also vegetative reactions and our everything that's going on in the body at a subconscious level. Also, it's not just restricted to consciousness. Um, so in Heidegger, Heidegger can say to Nietzsche, look at Protagoras, for instance. So Protagoras has this superficially nihilistic or superficially relativist thinking, right? So it's a bit like Nietzsche, but less sort of excited in all its dimension, in all the dimensions of the senses, but it just has to do more with opinion. But here, Protagoras basically says what happens is, even though it's true, this is the only measure we have. Nonetheless, we kind of sense that say Socrates might know something. Some people sense that Socrates um, knew something, right? So then they go listen to him. Maybe they can't see it through his eyes. Maybe they can. Maybe they take it on trust that he's in a higher position. So then you can still, from the superficially relative position, you could still think maybe a certain kind of vision is perfect. Maybe if you get 20 cones, you've gone too far. Maybe there's a certain spot which is optimal there. And with respect to everything else, I mean, maybe being a plant is the highest thing. We don't know that. So it's interesting to think of perspectivalism if you think of um, quite a few people find it natural to think of it this way. Some people won't accept it. But if you just remove all the senses and then you say, is a plant just like something that where you kind of remove all the senses? Maybe it has a little bit of the sense of solidity or touch because it's moving around in the sun. Um, whether a Venus flytrap really has taste or anything like that, we don't know. Maybe they have some just minimal senses. But then if you add to the plant um, this which Heidegger has is reflectiveness, so that there's this sort of uncanny Golden Gate Bridge between uh, the sudden pause of things and mere stare, and then the entering into the action of things. Um, Even perhaps a plant could have that in some sense, so that it would be in some way basically analogous to us, and maybe in a better, more pleasant situation, or maybe pleasantness isn't the right standard, and so on. The plant doesn't have language, so the plant isn't talking to itself. Therefore, the plant hasn't invented knowledge. But nonetheless, in some sense, the plant would be have a position which could be judged against other positions in this way of looking at it, in the Protagorean, in the proper Protagorean way of thinking about it, that we only have, as it were, um, the phenomena that we're producing ourselves in the Kantian sense, or the virtual reality, if you like. Each one has their own virtual reality, but nonetheless, it's not solipsistic. There's still all the other ones, and then you can dimly sense maybe the other one has this characteristic, maybe has that characteristic. So in this way, there's Nietzsche's nihilism, so-called, is can be defeated. But on the other hand, you can say this whole everything that defeats it is yet again one of these life-giving lies, or it's yet again this thing with the Bertold Niebuhr, the Prussian, who wrote the Prussian diplomat and businessman, I guess, who Nietzsche quotes to say that in all these things, what's happening is somebody's reading a deep emotion into um, a form of grasping things, a form of knowledge. I think one of the most powerful ones he goes towards is where he compares the old astrologers who thought that the stars were in a certain sense within us because we're gazing them through our intelligence, and that it's in a little bit like a Dasein relationship where they thought that the stars they care about our behavior, as it were. They're interested in what we're doing. They say something to us precisely because they're within us. Nietzsche says this mistake, as it were, of reading ourselves into the things is being made in just the same way with science and the current interpretation, which is the same as, which is more or less the same as the interpretation we have now with the Nietzschean change effected by Simmel and Weber and people like that, with the fact value distinction coming into the sciences. But it's, in fact, that has its strong origin in Nietzsche, even if you can say that its genealogy goes back to Kant and Hume and so forth, and even before Hume, actually. But there, he's saying that we're doing exactly the same thing. We're just taking something which is all us, all our virtual reality, or whatever you want to call it, all our phenomena being created from our perspective, from our position, and then being juxtaposed against speech or against our powers of generalizing and of linking things up and transferring meaning with analogy and so on. So then, with that, if we were to correct that and just then say, it's like the Protagoras, like I was just saying, the Protagorean situation, you would still be ontic in Heidegger's view. And moreover, ultimately, you can't really ever prove that one position out of that would be the highest position in a way that would be, it seems to me that's what Strauss is trying to do. And maybe it's true, but it's hard. It's hard to see the conditions which we could show that it were true. Um, that's a long question. But Heidegger wants to step out of all of these and say that there's a third possibility beside from juxtaposing something like the image of a stone with the inner sense of pain that the stone brings, or solidity that the stone has, that the two positions must stand on the same ground, and that the path towards it, the uncanny yellow brick road into this, comes through his thinking, which we were trying to approach a little bit by thinking of George Berkeley, but which we'll try to bring in Kant and see if we can get towards that in the next discussion.